Welcome to Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. Thanks for being with us. Madelyn, Burke, and Lance Medow with you. The phone number here is 201-939-4513. Find us on Twitter at #GiantsChat. I'm at Madelyn Burke. He's at Lance Medow, Medow.
There you go.
And as a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and giants.com/podcast. Lance, I'm thrilled to be doing my first BBK with you.
Absolutely. Yes, the feeling is mutual. We'll see how this experiment and what the callers bring to the table, but it's always going to be an adventure here on Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Always a good time. Always a good time getting the callers involved. And again, 201-939-4513 is the number. Listen, it's a short week. The Giants are still out in Arizona. We're shaking things up all across the board as we rework the schedule because it's a short week. I mean, Thursday Night Football, Giants headed to Arizona and, of course, or to San Francisco. And, of course, the big news, Lance, we saw Saquon Barkley dealing with that ankle injury in Sunday's game. Not likely or not expected to play. Reports that he could be out for a few weeks, and like a sprained ankle, ain't nothing to play with. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly don't want to mess with this. You look at Saquon's history, Madelyn. This is the third time in 5 years that he's dealt with some type of an ankle injury. In 2019, he missed 3 games. 2021, he missed 4. So, unfortunately, this is nothing new. But to your point, especially on a quick turnaround, it goes without saying you never want to put a player in a position where he's going to aggravate it. And you don't want to bring him back too soon because we've seen, whether it's ankle injuries, hamstring issues, calf issues, you name it, a player comes back, tries to overdo it, and then what appears to be a 2 to 3 week injury becomes a lingering 7-8 week injury, God forbid.
Right.
So this to me is a no-brainer. You sit him, you rest him, you let him take his time. I know you just mentioned there are multiple reports. The team is not admitting anything in terms of timeline. So you do the math. Could he come back, Madelyn, for the Sunday Night Bills game? If you go and look at the next 3 weeks, possibly. But, once again, every ankle injury is different. And just because he missed 3 to 4 games the last time doesn't mean that it's going to follow the exact same game plan.
Right. And like you said, every ankle injury is different. You look at an injury like this, and there could be a projected timeline. But, the way it's handled, the travel, all that, it comes into play. But
Sure.
One interesting part about this schedule that the Giants have right now is they've got a Thursday night game this week. Their next game isn't until a Monday night, October 2nd, at home against the Seahawks. So when you have that big of a stretch in between games too, whether or not it helps Saquon, I think in general the health of the team will be benefited by that long gap between weeks 3 and 4.
Yeah, and that holds true for a bunch of the other players, like a Ben Bredesen, who's
Right.
in concussion protocol. I mean, the chances of him playing Thursday, just my personal opinion, I think are very slim because
Sure.
normally guys need about a full week to get through concussion protocol, so that'll help him. And then even a guy like Andrew Thomas.
Yeah, with the
if he
hamstring.
doesn't suit up on Thursday, now you have an extended week till the next game against the Seattle Seahawks. So the schedule cooperates from that standpoint. But I think as far as Saquon Barkley is concerned, you can imagine how frustrated he must be because the last thing you want to have to go through, given the contractual situation. But putting that aside, to me, it's more of he's been through this before. And he
Right.
understands, okay, here we go, what the rehab process is going to be like. I know a lot of people are looking at, he took his helmet off and he threw it down and everybody saw that image. I mean, to me, I think he was just coming to the grips in the moment. If this turns out to be what I
Right.
went through in the previous years, he's sort of embracing mentally, okay, there's going to be a multi-week thing, and this is the last thing that I want to have to go through right out of the gates in week 2.
Right. And of course, the frustration is completely relatable, right? You go through that, you feel it, he knew right away that he had something wrong. He was limping up and down the sideline. You saw him throw in that helmet because he was frustrated the fact that he's back on the field with his teammates. They agreed to terms on a deal. They're out there. And it's like, no, I don't want to miss this. We're doing something special. And this is, of course, late in the fourth quarter amidst a comeback that this team was putting together. They had not yet fully completed it yet, too. So I think he was experiencing not just the frustration of the coming weeks, but of the moment of, look at this, we're almost there. We're almost across the goal line and getting this comeback done. It's relatable to say, oh, I just want to be out there with my teammates and helping them get this.
Well, plus he had one of the biggest runs down the stretch.
Yeah.
That run where he made about 75 other guys miss and then, was weaving in and out of traffic. So we know what he's capable of doing and how much of a game changer he is. And I know a lot of people are now wondering, okay, moving forward, how do you fill the void?
Right.
Well, the good news is they have some depth. Matt Breida, he's been in the system. He's been with Brian Daboll going back to their Buffalo days. And he actually is a former San Francisco 49er
Right.
himself. And Eric Gray, they they just drafted, and they have Gary Brightwell. So you're not pressed upon an issue where it's a numbers game. I think you have three guys that bring something a little bit different to the table. But, I mean, let's not be naive, Madelyn. Saquon brings an element to the running game that none of those three other guys can do. And from San Francisco's defensive standpoint, right, you're preparing for the Giants on a quick turnaround. It's a lot easier to digest the fact that you got to deal with those three guys as opposed to trying to chase down Saquon Barkley. It'd be the equivalent of if you took Christian McCaffrey out of the lineup for the Niners, right, and you started to turn to the backups. The Giants are certainly not losing sleep over that. That's a pleasant surprise to them. So it's the equivalency from that standpoint. But I think if the Giants' offensive line can piggyback off of what it did against Arizona, there's no reason why they can't have a semblance of a run game. It's just you're not going to have maybe those same back-breaking plays that Saquon Barkley presents.
Yeah, and just want to give a quick hat tip, too, to Matt Breida, because Matt Breida coming in the fourth quarter cold, right? He's cold off the bench and getting that 5-yard run and making an impact right away. I think this is a guy, too, if given the rock, if given opportunity in San Francisco, the place he started his career as an undrafted free agent in 2017. He led the 49ers in rushing in 2018. He was a part of the 49ers team that made it to the Super Bowl in 2019. He wasn't on the active roster for the game, but they, the Niners lost to the Chiefs, of course, that year. But this is a team that he's got a lot of memories for. And there's always, I don't care what anybody says, if you're playing against a team that you've spent significant time at, you want to show them what they're missing, right?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be on his mind.
It'll be on his mind, yeah.
For him, it's a nice unexpected opportunity, right? Because, I mean, the last thing you're thinking about is a teammate like Saquon Barkley going down. But Breida, Brightwell, and Gray, I think they all have different skill sets.
Sure.
So the positive is, there's not a lot of film of Eric Gray.
Exactly.
Because he's only had 2 games into his career, and he's mostly been a special teamer. Then you look at Gary Brightwell. There's also been some flashes. I actually thought Brightwell did a nice job last season in some spot duty. If you look at the majority of his runs, I mean, more often than not, he was getting at least 5 yards per carry. So, that's more of the big bruiser element that he brings into play. And then Matt Breida, as you mentioned, he's the polished veteran.
Right.
So if you have a key third down and ball security is a concern, I'd say you put Breida into the equation. He can also catch the ball in the backfield. So from that standpoint, it's going to be more of the equivalent of in baseball, the bullpen by committee, running back by committee, I think is how the Giants will approach moving forward in the absence of Saquon Barkley. Also, Brightwell's a special teamer, Madelyn, and Eric Gray is now involved in the returns.
Right.
Not to say that you'd overdo it, but I think you want to take that into consideration, especially a young guy like Eric Gray. You don't want to throw out X amount of carries, especially on a Thursday night game that quickly. So that's more of a reason why I think it makes sense to try to tap into all 3 backs.
Right. And, Gray has been involved in the returns, as you mentioned, too, despite the fact that he did it less than a dozen times in 4 years of college between Oklahoma and Tennessee. Like, this is something that is still new for him, but he's been doing pretty well. He did quite well with it last week. And he's another guy who's known to catch the ball out of the backfield and have those similar skill sets. It's just what he's been asked to do so far. The fact that there's not a lot of tape on him could be a benefit for this team in general. But also you mentioned the offensive line and the rework of what we saw last week. You saw Zudu getting the start at left guard or left tackle. You saw McKeithen at right guard, essentially the rookie McKeithen, because he's getting a mulligan year. He was out all last year with the ACL. The Glowinski coming in at left guard, despite the fact that he's been working mostly on the right side, kind of figuring some things out early on, but getting it done. And they were giving Daniel Jones time to throw the ball.
Yeah, and that was the biggest difference, especially in the second half, Madelyn, when they had a number of chunk/explosive plays.
Right.
Because unlike the Dallas game,
Daniel
Jones
wasn't getting touched.
Yeah, he had an opportunity to survey the field. Now, I will say this. A positive development, but there's a distinct difference between what Arizona presents on the defensive side of the ball versus what San Francisco presents. And San Francisco, to me, is more in the range of Dallas. So you take what is offered to you based on the matchup, but it is a matchup-oriented league. So what I mean is just because you fared well against Arizona does not necessarily mean it's going to be duplicated against San Francisco. I think this is going to be a really good test for this reworked offensive line to determine, okay, can they duplicate what we saw against Arizona, or was it more of a product of the Cardinals, with Dennis Gardeck being their best pass rusher, is not the same level of intensity that San Francisco brings to the table.
Right, but coming off of that, that comeback, that win, that 31 points in the second half, the incredible performance offensively that they had in that second half of the game, going in to face this Niners defense, which is exponentially harder to go against, I think that confidence is going to be a little bit helpful in that preparation week as well. Right?
Well, a completely different story than if you wind up losing this last game and you don't score any points again. And you can imagine mentally where the team would be. But, we've also seen this Giants team, and I go back to last season, Madelyn, and I think there's some weight put in this because it was the same coaching staff. They only lost 2 games in a row once. That was it.
Right.
So this team has a track record, at least under Dable, small sample size, of bouncing back, regardless of what the circumstances are. Daniel Jones also has a very good track record based on his record. He was 8-1-1 entering the Sunday game, so now 9-1-1. So all of those, I think, were positives, even if, God forbid, to your point, they didn't have that historical comeback and regroup against Arizona. I don't know if I would be saying to myself, I'm worried about how the team's going to react against San Francisco, because once again, I think they've proven they don't let one baggage, one game carry over to the next.
Exactly. And you know what? Fresh slate, credit to the coaching staff for keeping them focused on that. And Giants fans, join us on Thursday, September 21st at BK Backyard in Brooklyn to watch the Giants take on San Francisco for Thursday Night Football. Enjoy Medow drink specials, meet a Giants legend, and enter a raffle to win game tickets and more. Visit Giants.com/Bar Network to learn more. BARNE. Oh, Bar Network. There we go. I'm like, how does that? Yes, you know what? That Arizona State education coming in handy. I'm like, what does this say? Bar Network. Anyway, Bar Network. All right.
That's a mouthful.
You know what? That's okay. I can read, y'all. And just make sure you go and subscribe to the Giants Huddle podcast. It features long-form interviews with Giants players, coaches, and front office staff, past and present. Plus, hear from the best analysts covering Big Blue and the NFL. Search for Giants Huddle and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or go to giants.com/podcast. And don't forget, if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star positive review for all our Giants podcasts. 201-939-4513 is the phone number. The phone lines are filling up, starting with Tom in Stratford. What's going on, Tom?
Hi, Madelyn. Hi, Lance. How are you guys today?
Doing
well, thanks.
The tenor of my call has changed 3 times. At halftime on Sunday, I was ready to jump off my balcony. And then at the end of the game, I was happy again. And then after watching last night's game, I just got sick to my stomach watching Chubb get hurt.
Sure.
And I don't know. I've called during the summer numerous times, harping on the players standing firm against an 18-game season, demanding better benefits, more care after their playing career is over. I mean, you look at Chubb, he's one of the fastest guys on the planet, and he's going to need a walker when he's 50 years old now.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart. And the NFL has so much money, they can easily cover taking care of their players after their careers are over. And but be that as it may, I just want to say also, I thought the 2 other things. I thought the announcers really stunk. I don't know what game they were watching, but when they were questioning why Bredesen was coming out, I mean, if you looked at the replay, you saw him get smashed in the head by another player, and then you saw him with, the lights were on, but no one was home when he's on the ground, and they're like, oh, I think it's his leg. No, it's not his leg, you moron. I mean, it's obviously his head. So, and then there was another play where some receiver came out, and Banks was on him, and it was in the flat, and he's like, get away from me, you little tiny cornerback. The guy ended up losing a yard in that play. Banks beat him to the sideline. So, and then finally, did anyone? I don't know if you guys noticed this, but sometime in the first half, when Danny scrambled and he ran out of bounds into the sideline on Arizona, one of the players went up to them and yelled at him, "Ha ha!" And Danny said something real quick to him, but the game is 2 halves long. So I was wondering if anyone ever went back to that player on Arizona and asked him if he wanted to laugh at Danny again. So.
All right, Tom. Well, appreciate that's not a problem. Appreciate the phone call.
Thanks.
That was a full broadcasting commentary in terms of the ins and the outs of the broadcast. I don't personally read too much into the war of words that occurs during the course of a game. I think that's just the emotional flow of a contest. So, I mean, I wouldn't be looking at that as a turning point as to that igniting the Giants' comeback. I think they just executed a lot better in the second half. And Madelyn, goes back to what we talked about earlier in the program. When the offensive line gives your quarterback time and you got the playmakers, you're going to see those results.
Yeah.
Also, the defense stepped up, got 3 and outs on the last 2 possessions, which was critical. Because remember, in the second half, when you're down by that much, it's the element of time that you're fighting against. You're not just fighting the opponent, you're fighting time. And if you go back and you look at the 5 scoring drives, and I wrote about this on Giants Cover 4, it was 14 plays of 10 or more yards in the second half, Madelyn. They only had 3 of that kind in the first half.
Yeah.
So that's 14 first downs that we're talking about. I mean, that's a huge volume, and you're getting these big chunk plays so you don't have to put together 15-play, 90-yard drives. If the Giants had to do that, if they were methodically moving up and down the field in the second half, this comeback probably doesn't come to fruition.
Right.
Because they just don't have the luxury and the time to do that. It was the fact that you had the big bomb to Jalen Hyatt, and then he had another 30-yard pass, and you had Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins and Waller, but chunks, 15 yards here, 20 yards here. That's what helped mount the comeback. There was none of that whatsoever in the first half.
Well, and that's what this offseason really has prioritized building in this offense, right? Is prioritize finding the tools and finding the assets to build an offense that can get you those chunk plays, something that the Giants struggled with in years past. And it seemed almost as though the Giants in the first half of the game against Arizona were playing with a little PTSD off of Dallas, right? They were playing expecting that same level of pressure, expecting that same level of attack on the quarterback. And it really took a while to realize, like, oh, wait, no, we do have a little bit of time here. We do actually have the ability to give Daniel the time to send these guys down the field and get those chunk plays. And you saw that very first drive out of the half, that 58-yard pass to Hyatt. Then Daniel Jones runs it in. And it's like, boom, 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 you're on the scoreboard. But the defense as well, they didn't really kind of find their rhythm until late. Defense didn't force a punt until, the fourth quarter?
Yep.
And they didn't have a 3-and-out until then as well. So it took a while for things to come together. But offense leading to defense, leading to offense, leading to defense, the momentum as well is an important part to notice.
And you look forward here, and there obviously are a variety of things that need to change on both facets of the team. But you brought up the defense. The alarming aspect to me through 2 games is the fact that there's no sacks and no takeaways.
Right.
And it's very hard to survive, Madelyn, in this league when you don't necessarily need 5 sacks a game, but you need some disruptive form of play.
Sure.
That is going to either change field position or alleviate things for your offense. And Arizona, once again, they were very fortunate that the offense was able to overcome some of the defensive shortcomings. You go up against a team like San Francisco, where they're very elusive. To me, the best way to describe the Niners, they're a slippery team.
Yeah.
Guys like Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, just when you think you have them down, they make a twirl, they make a spin, and then what should be a 3-yard gain turns into 15. So you look at James Conner and what he was able to do, they can't repeat that in terms of the missed tackling. You got to bring these guys down, or else that's going to come back to bite you. And if you can't rely on sacks and takeaways to do some damage control, that's where all of a sudden it comes back to bite you.
Well, the other point, too, is, you look at Wink's defense and you think of Wink Martindale defense, you think about blitz, right? This man calls blitz in preseason. He loves a blitz. But despite leading the league in calling up the blitz on 39.7% of the time last year, they've only dialed up the blitz about 14.3% of the time this year. That's not a lot in comparison. And you might say, well, why? You look at the way that these games have panned out. First of all, the Cowboys offense didn't even get on the field until late in the first quarter.
Because of game flow.
Because of game flow. And because of game flow, there were less passing plays. There were less dropbacks. There were less of those blitzable opportunities. So I do anticipate that will change based on game flow. And Xavier McKinney was talking about that earlier this week. He said, hey, we just got to be patient, not try to get out of the framework of our defense, what Wink calls, stick to the plan. We know they'll come in bunches, and that's kind of how they do, right? Sacks, takeaways, they often come in bunches. And even though this defense isn't one that schematically seems to prioritize interceptions and takeaways, a lot of the guys personally are prioritizing it and are saying, hey, you know what, we're going to get to the ball.
Well, you look at last season, they had 6 interceptions. That was tied for dead last with the Raiders in the NFL. They were not a big opportunistic team from that standpoint. As far as total takeaways, as I bring up my chart from last season, they had 19. They did have 13 fumble recoveries. But that's also a bit of a fluky statistic because sometimes the ball has to bounce your way.
Right.
And you can knock the ball out, but Madelyn, if you're not in position to recover it.
If they recover it again.
The opposition can recover it. So you never know how that's going to play out. And I think the reason why they're not Wink's defense is as opportunistic is if he plays a lot of man, and actually he has not played a lot of that in the first 2 games, and I think maybe that's a product of 2 young corners getting their feet wet. Your corners are more concerned with playing the man as opposed to playing the ball. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's just the nature of the beast.
Right. Even though Sunday, Hawkins had his hands on it, came down, the ground forced it out, but it was like, you wanted that for the young guy too, because this is a guy, 6th-round pick out of Old Dominion, getting the starting role and almost had a great pick in that spot as well. But, they come in the moments, and it's about what you do in that moment too. And if it's an almost, it doesn't show up on a stat sheet.
Yeah, it's just one of those close plays, and also it will have to sit in your memory because there's no statistical category in the NFL that says you had 3 close fumble recoveries.
You got a hand on it, kid.
Yeah, I mean, you don't get any brownie points for that. Just like interceptions, they don't give you context to when it goes off of an individual's fingertips, like in Daniel's case, right?
Right.
Went off of Saquon Barkley, and then the first one against Dallas also was a deflection. All of that is important to tell the story, as every turnover tells a completely different narrative and so forth. But to me, it's not so much the takeaways here. It's about, can you get the quarterback hits and the sacks up?
Right.
Can you do that? And Brock Purdy is a mobile quarterback. He's a guy that can move out of the pocket, and he likes to lean on his playmakers. So that's why you got to find that middle ground where you could disrupt him, but you can't sacrifice being out of position, Madelyn. Because once again, if the Niners have an opening, you go back to that Rams game on Sunday, a lot of those plays, Deebo Samuel had a touchdown.
Yeah.
Purdy dumped it off to him in the left flat, and he zigzagged in and out of traffic. There must have been at least 5 or 6 missed tackles on that play. That's why that has to be more of the emphasis on a short week. You want to get the takeaways, you want to get the sacks, but if there's any game where you got to get back to the fundamentals and keep big play potential in check, to me, it's Thursday night against the Niners.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Giants fans, take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. 201-939-4513. Joey from Florida is on the line. Joey, how's it going?
Hey, folks. How you doing today?
Doing well. Right. How are you?
So my question, I'm good, thank you.
Good.
My question is in regards to our edge play. So according to Pro Football Reference, last year, the Giants ranked 6th in pressure rate, which was 24.3%. But this season, they've fallen all the way to 18th. I'm concerned about Azeez and his injury history. The best ability for a person in the NFL is their availability.
Yep.
And, that it's becoming evident that he's not reliable in that aspect. And Kayvon Thibodeau, he played 94% of the snaps on Sunday, and he only had 1 quarterback hit.
Overall, in fairness, overall, the entire team has not had many quarterback hits. Right. I mean, I understand you want more production out of him, no disagreement, but to just pinpoint 1, I think is not necessarily telling the whole story, because the whole team needs to increase in that department.
Correct. Yeah. But I was going to say, I know that is because he also dropped into coverage, and that's because of Wink Martindale's scheme. What do you need to see from like Wink Martindale or just the edge group overall in order to, get those takeaways, get those sacks? And, when do we push the panic button on Azeez specifically, if he just can't stay healthy? And do you see them going out and maybe trading for a veteran, or what do you think the solution is?
Well, I don't know about trading for a veteran, Joey, and I appreciate the phone call, because I think, once again, you still need to develop the young guys on this roster, and there's no guarantee that a team is going to give up a premier edge rusher, considering once you get them, you usually retain them, you give them the franchise tag, and you sign them. So I don't know how realistic that is. As far as hitting the panic button, I would agree with you. I said this before the season started, Madelyn. Azeez, to me, is the X factor this year.
Yeah.
Because if he could stay on the field, now you have a complementary piece to Kayvon Thibodeau. Unfortunately, right out of the gates, he's already dealing with the injury, and he was a limited participant in Monday's practice. They had a walkthrough, so this was a projection.
It's a projection,
but hamstring injuries are tricky. I mean, we were talking about the ankle with Saquon.
Mm-hmm.
Hamstrings, Andrew Thomas is dealing with one. You bring back a guy too soon, he aggravates it, and then all of a sudden he's out another month. So I understand if the Giants want to take a very practical approach to not rush it, because you want, to the caller's point, you want him to get on the field sooner rather than later. You want him to be a spectator. As far as moving forward, what they have to do is they have to disrupt the quarterback. The way you get takeaways is You hit the quarterback's arm, the ball flies up. Defensive back is in the right place at the right time. You hit the quarterback in the right spot. He loses the ball. Look at the Browns-Steelers game last night. My goodness, it was a turnover fiesta, left and right.
It really was.
One issue after another. Why? Because they were hitting Deshaun Watson, the Steelers. And as a result, they got 2 turnovers, which resulted in touchdowns. So the easy answer is you got to impact the quarterback. And I'm bringing up the numbers. They barely got a piece of Dak, but as you brought up, game flow didn't allow them to get after Dak. Okay, now game flow, I would argue, Madelyn, against the Cardinals allowed for more opportunities. Against Joshua Dobbs, especially in the second half when the game is becoming more competitive. He did a nice job, Dobbs. I thought he looked much more comfortable than in week 1 against Washington. You could see he was on the right page with his personnel, but you've got to make him think twice about where he wants to go with the ball. And they did have 6 quarterback hits, so that was a step in the right direction. No sacks, but 6 quarterback hits. I think as the quarterback hits go up, what tends to follow is the sacks will come. So if I were to give you a volume number, and I don't know how realistic this is, but if you continue to get into that 6 to 8 quarterback hit territory, the Giants, it's not going to be too long before they start getting at least a sack or 2 per game. But that's the number you want. You can't have games where you have 2, maybe 3 quarterback hits. That has to be higher than 5 to make a true impact here.
Right. And as the caller mentioned, 18th in the league in pressure percentage, 19.3%. It's not terrible. It's not terrible, but it's again, game flow, especially in week 1, playing into that number. Week 2, yes, there were more opportunities they could have capitalized on. They did get 6 hits, as you mentioned, 6 quarterback hits, but it's building off of that. And it's all these almost moments that we talk about that just don't show up in the stat sheet. I mean, I remember Leonard Williams' first year here. He was like the king of the almost moment. He'd get there, disrupt a play, and do something that would affect a play but wouldn't show up on a stat sheet. And so if you're looking at the stat sheet, you're like, where's Leonard Williams? But you're watching the film, you're like, oh, okay. That almost is the enemy of excellent right there. And you talk about these hamstring injuries too. Oh, go ahead. You had something.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, you talk about these hamstring injuries too, and they are, like you said, they are the biggest, not Achilles heel, they are the biggest hamstring of athletes because you come back, pun intended, right? You come back from it and you feel like, okay, I'm ready to go. I can do it. I can run. I can do everything I want to do. But then you get in game speed. And that next level, that twitch, that it's just not there. They have these machines in the training room called a Nord board that actually test how much strain and how much ability how much strength your hamstring has, because there's so much science that goes into just getting the hamstring. You'll feel like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm fine. I'm 100%. And it's like, no, you're not. And so getting that one, especially to be right, is important, because if you come back too soon, you'll tweak it and it'll be an extra few weeks.
Well, I think it goes to what you're saying. There's a distinct difference, and this applies to Saquon Barkley's ankle injury. You could feel good, but if you can't cut, if you don't have that speed aspect, you're going into the game handicapped.
Right.
And the defense is going to eventually get a read on you. No different than if you ask the elite pass rushers in this league, Madelyn, if Andrew Thomas were to play with a hamstring issue, and we saw it in the Dallas game, I mean, he was trying to give it his all, but you knew he wasn't anywhere close to maybe even 85%. The pass rushers lining up opposite you, they sense that. They know what they can then do to get an edge on you. So sometimes a player, he may be good enough to get into a game, but he's not at the point where he can be as effective from a football standpoint.
Right. Well,
and that's where you have to draw the line.
And speaking of injury, we've got some injury news right here. Brian Dable reportedly interrupted a question about the widely reported timeline on Saquon's return and says the running back has not even been ruled out for Thursday's game. Tom Rock tweeting that he spoke with Barkley this morning. He is feeling better, quote, considerable progress in the past day or so is the phrase that Dable used. Ryan Dunleavy tweeting that Dable says he's a, quote, quick healer, expects to be a game time decision Thursday against San Francisco. So major plot twist right here. Is this, is this a little gamesmanship? Is this just, does Saquon suddenly have Wolverine healing abilities? Remains to be seen, but wanted to keep you guys up to date because, of course, Brian Dable is addressing the Giants media pool right now, the press pool right now in Arizona.
Well, I will say this. Brian Dable is the king of plot twists when it comes to interacting with the media. So
I love it.
I can't say I'm surprised to hear him say that. I mean, he wasn't even ruling out Andrew Thomas leading up to the Arizona game.
Right.
So keep in mind, Brian Dable is a product of the Bill Belichickian school of thought, as I like to call it. He graduated from New England. He was up close and personal with Bill. He knows all the tricks to the trade. And listen, he's of no obligation to tell San Francisco what exactly they're thinking or the well-being of their players. So I wouldn't expect anything different from Brian Daboll. But there is a distinct difference between what he knows deep down inside versus what he is bringing to the table with respect to the media. My personal opinion, and this is just me speaking, I'd be very surprised if Saquon Barkley plays Thursday. I'd be very surprised if Ben Bredesen plays on Thursday. I'm not saying Daboll's going to come out and already rule them out a day or two before, but you do the math, you put logic together, highly unlikely those guys are going to be out there.
Highly unlikely indeed, but I guarantee we'll see a few headlines about Saquon Barkley could play Thursday, and our callers and listeners are going to be like, wait, what?
We need to build it up to Thursday's game. You know, there is still a day between
the drama.
Contest there. Exactly.
It's a primetime matchup. The drama needs to be there.
Let's add to it.
Let's add to it. Hey, Giants fans, run or walk with Giants legends. The Giants Foundation will host a 5K race and kids run presented by Quest on Sunday, October 8th at 9 a.m. at MetLife Stadium. Net proceeds will benefit the Giants Foundation. All participants will receive a commemorative T-shirt, and after the race, stay for a post-race festival with appearances by Giants legends and a live DJ. Register now at giants.com/5K. See, 5K is so much easier to read than
Bar Network.
Bar Network.
What you were saying? Yeah.
Barn at work. Either way. I don't know. 201-939-4513 is the number. Big Blue Kickoff Live with Madelyn and Lance. We've got Jim in New York on the line. Jim, how's it going?
Hey, how are you today?
Good, thanks.
You're right.
A couple of quick questions. First of all, some gamesmanship by Dave's, obviously, with this
a little bit.
Saquon Barkley thing.
Just a tad.
If he plays, I'll probably be his backup, so I don't think it's going to happen. You know, it's really strange is the previous regime passed on Micah McFadden, or not Micah McFadden, excuse me, Parsons. And that sort of set us back a couple of years, in my opinion. Didn't we pass on him and trade down to get Kadarius Toney?
Yeah, that was the trade to move to get Kadarius Toney, correct. Yeah.
Okay. Probably one of the worst moves in the history of football. But we have to live with that, because if we had Parsons, we wouldn't have had to draft Kayvon Thibodeau, which, to be perfectly honest with you, at this point, I know it's only been a season and 2 games, but he's a total whiff. I haven't seen anything. I mean, he had a few good games last year. He sacked a third-string quarterback in Washington, recovered the fumble, and went into the end zone, and he had a few decent games late. But if you look at him this year, he's nowhere near the play. I know he plays a lot of positions. He's a one-trick pony when he rushes the passer. He goes on the outside. He never twists on the inside. I don't understand how you can't teach somebody to twist. I just really completely disappointed in him, and truthfully, I'd be very surprised if in 2 years he's in a Giant uniform. I don't see anything from him at all. I'd like your opinion on that.
Well, they need to be more disruptive. I don't dispute that. I'd say the whole team. And clearly, it starts with your premier pass rusher. I think Kayvon be the first one to admit that the production needs to skyrocket. Azeez Ojulari needs to get on the field. He needs to stay healthy. I mean, that is obviously the most prevalent item that they need to address moving forward, because if they don't disrupt the quarterback, you're not going to get sacks and you're not going to get takeaways. So I think it goes without saying. As far as the Micah Parsons point, and Micah is an absolute disruptor, but in fairness, when we make the argument overall of the coulda, woulda, shoulda game, we don't know if the Giants would have even taken Micah Parsons if they didn't trade with the Bears. Let's not forget about that. Rashawn Slater, by the way, was still on the board. He went 13th to the Chargers. Maybe they take Rashawn Slater. So I don't know if it's a guarantee they take Micah Parsons. I know everybody wants to play that game, but it's possible the Giants stay at 11 and they take a different player. You have to at least take that into consideration.
I do. I took it in consideration. The only thing, I mean, the rumors were a few years ago that he was a little bit of a head case. And that's one of the reasons.
Well, there were some off-the-field questions, too, of course.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why I think they traded down to get somebody else, which turned out to be a terrible move. But now, truthfully, it was the same thing about Kayvon Thibodeau. There was questions about what his conduct of being a player is too. So you traded down to pass on a guy that you thought may had some off the field issues. He's like all all world. And then 2 years later, you take a guy with the exact same thing with half the talent.
Well, I mean, once again, we could sit here and play the coulda, woulda, shoulda game, and I appreciate the phone call. The other thing not to overlook is the fact that you don't get Darren Waller and Trey Hawkins.
Exactly, because the
assets
pick.
used in the Tony. So, there's a trade-off here. I understand Micah Parsons is probably going to go down as a generational talent. I mean, clearly he's showcasing that in a very limited resume, but you don't get some of those other pieces on the defensive and the offensive side of the ball. So you got to look at it from that standpoint as well.
Right. Hindsight is always 20/20. You can look back and say coulda, woulda, shoulda. But you're right. If they had ended up with Micah Parsons, there are so many domino effects that wouldn't have fallen the same way. They would have had different draft picks in the subsequent years. They wouldn't have had the Kadarius Toney trade, which, like you said, the third rounder went to the Raiders for Darren Waller. The sixth rounder went to drafting Trey Hawkins, both impactful players on this current iteration of the Giants. So butterfly effect, sliding doors, whatever you want to call it. You look back at it, and so many things would be different.
Well, the other thing that I want to add, Madelyn, is the last caller said that they moved down, perhaps, or at least was alluding to it, because maybe there were questions about Micah Parsons. And once again, we don't know the conversation that went on in the draft room, but what I would add is I think a big part of the reason why they moved down is to get the additional first-round pick.
Right.
Because they looked at the roster and said, if we could gain an additional asset the following year in 2022, which they did when they drafted Kayvon and Evan Neal, that would be now adding one guy on each side of the ball, as opposed to if you stay put, you don't have the additional first-round pick. Now, it's a business result-oriented situation I would talk about here, meaning that if you pick two guys in the first round and they don't pan out, volume's great, but it's all about what have you done for me lately. I get that. But I think part of the motivation was to get the additional first-round pick, not necessarily you're worried about who you may have considered selecting there.
And if you get the first-round pick, the additional first-round pick, and a player that you have scouted and you believe does have potential in this league, then it works out. In that moment, you're going into this not thinking, oh, this guy's going to be a miss. You're going into it thinking this is going to be a player that can impact our roster as is, and then we also have an additional asset down the way. You never know in those moments that you're making the right call or the wrong call. You just do your best with the information that you've got. The 2023 NFL schedule is officially out, and single game tickets are on sale now. Don't miss the Giants at MetLife Stadium this season. Visit giants.com/tickets to secure your seat. 201-939-4513. Dave in Cranford is on the line. Dave, you're on with Madelyn and Lance.
All right, LT was picked third, so whatever. We could talk about this whole day. It drives me crazy.
Exactly.
So whatever. I love how Daboll handles the media. He treats them like mushrooms. keep them in the dark and feed them some other stuff. So I love that. I think he's brilliant. I don't think Barkley plays, but I guess I'm always big on the coaching, and I really think that Sunday's game was a real reflection of the coaching. I really liked. I think the biggest thing coming out of Sunday was the play of Azudu and McKeithen. And not only in that game, I thought they both played well, but I think what those two could give to this staff going forward, just a little bit of depth and flexibility depending when other guys come back. I don't think McKeithen's going to be moved out of right guard anytime soon with the way he played. I think Azudu showed himself to be very flexible, and I think that was really, really good, and I think it was an important change. And ironically, they benched Glowinski, and next thing you know, he's in and played well at a different position. So I thought that was a great move by the coaching staff.
Well, what it is a reflection of well before the season starts, you prepare these guys for those spots by having them take practice reps. That, to me, is what Sunday was a product of.
Right.
You don't get that if Josh Azudu doesn't get opportunities to line up at left tackle leading up to the last few games. You don't get that unless you move Marcus McKeithen into guard. I mean, they had mixing and matching situations play out during the course of practice, and that's why I don't think it was a rude awakening. Not to mention, those two guys at North Carolina moved around a lot. And this goes back to the draft and how you construct your roster. You can't draft offensive linemen who only play one spot, because you're not going to get through the season with 5 guys playing all 17 games. So by the Giants going out and finding players that assumed guard and tackle spots. It gave them a lot more versatility to play with. But I think the practice reps those two guys got was huge to make them feel comfortable on Sunday.
I agree. And I mean, Zudu, even at Carolina, didn't get a lot of reps at tackle, but he did get a lot of reps at tackle in the last 2 years of training camps and Giants practices as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I would just say about this game coming up, guys, I think that I think you're right, both of you, in terms of the running back depth. I think that I think they can get production. I actually think, Lance, you very good point. I think Brightwell's a funny runner, man. I think he's a strong runner, and I do think that he will have a role. I think it'll be limited. I do think we'll see a lot of our main backup, but I think the thing that you lose with Barkley, which they know, meaning the offensive staff knows, is the amount of attention he gets and the amount of eyes that go on him. And, whether it's in the RPO game or even in the passing game, you saw the touchdown pass, to Hodgins. There was a double team on Barkley to the left side that really opened up the pathway for Hodgins to catch that ball. So you're going to lose that. So I really think that this staff is going to look at Waller and Hyatt as the two other players on the team that can draw that type of attention, particularly Hyatt. I think that you're going to see his snap count on Thursday night increase, even if his catch count doesn't increase. I think you'll see a snap count increase just because they saw on tape, meaning the 49ers saw on tape everything we saw, which is this guy can absolutely take the top off of a defense. They're going to be aware of that. I think that's the Giants' best offensive, ability to manipulate the defense to open up other things underneath, whether it's for Slayton, whether it's for Waller. That I expect to see them, and the one guy that scares me on the 49ers more than anybody else is Fred Warner, their middle linebacker. Yeah. He's an underrated, in some ways, but unknown. He's not Bosa, he's not Parsons or whatever, but he is as good as it gets. And I think they give them a lot of trouble. But love this coaching staff, love what they're doing. And I think the last thing I'll leave you with is this, and that is, I think Daniel Jones is thrilled to get back out there Thursday night. And the reason I say that is because I think he found himself in his zone on the second half. I think he was, really, dialed in. And I think he wants to get back out there and catch that same energy. And I think that's going to be the difference for us. So thanks, guys.
You got it, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Appreciate
Thanks
the phone
for the call. And he's right. Fred Warner, 9 solo tackles, 2 assists, and a sack in week 2. Game wrecker, and not even the most notable of the defensive players.
Well, that's because they got Javon Hargrave, they got Nick Bosa, they got Eric Armstead, who play in front of him. So
casual.
He does a nice job of falling under the radar, but putting up numbers that don't go under the radar. Mm-hmm. And yeah, he's a fundamentally sound linebacker. They'll apply pressure with him. He's very good in terms of covering sideline to sideline. He's an active guy. And when you don't have to worry about Saquon Barkley, it does give the defense a little bit more flexibility. Now, as far as the point of Jalen Hyatt and Darren Waller being attention seekers, sure, you just wonder, do they have the flexibility, the Niners, to double some of those guys because they're not worried about bringing an extra guy into the box.
Right.
See, Arizona, they didn't have that luxury because Arizona knew if we let Barkley go wild, they're going to continue to get chunk plays. San Francisco may say, let's see what Matt Breida and Gray and Brightwell could do. Let's see if they get the running game going before we adapt and adjust.
But also, Lance, there's a player you might be not thinking of in that situation as well, in one Daniel Jones. And what does Daniel Jones do with his legs as well? And that's also a threat that I think that whether or not Saquon is there, they got to be mindful of Daniel Jones taking off and running as well.
No, 100%. Point well taken. I just think, though, it's a different combination, especially I'll go back to the Eagles.
Sure.
Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, Kenneth Gainwell, Boston Scott. This was last year. You had to account for on any given play.
Right.
He can take off. Now that you remove Saquon, I think you're worried about Daniel taking off, but the question is, are you worried about what some of those other running backs do? I think that's why this is a game where if the Giants can establish the run early, that's a game changer because that now gives San Francisco something to think about.
Yeah.
Because you have to account for Daniel and the rest of the backs. If the Niners could shut down the run game, I think that gives them a little bit more freedom on the back end.
I agree. 201-939-4513. Speaking of the run game, Hugo in New Jersey is online too. Hugo, how's it going? You're on with Madelyn and Lance.
Yeah, so I did want to talk about the run game, but I'm just going back to one of my off-season predictions. I predicted that by the end of the year, Mark Lewinsky would be riding the pine. Now, John Schmelk adamantly disagreed, but here we are, third game of the season, and it's clear that Mark Lewinsky will be on the bench and will be a backup.
Well, we don't know that. If Bredesen's out, which he probably will, then he could very well be at left guard.
Yeah.
Hugo, so I wouldn't jump the gun so quickly.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's a temporary plug-in player. I mean, when Thomas comes back, I think it's pretty clear that Izzuto will be playing next to Thomas. And I think I made that prediction that those two guys have really good feet, so it gives us a very athletic left side of the line and then a big, powerful right side of the line with Neal and McKeithen and then, John Michael Schmitz anchoring. I think that's probably the best combination. He's a backup player. For injury reasons, he might play this game, but I just don't see that as the solution. It's either going to be Bredesen or Izzuto at left guard going forward. So anyhow, that was my prediction. Now,
so is this a pat on the back phone call? Is that what the purpose of this was?
It
sounds like it.
Yet,
you must have said like 300 times that this was the prediction you made. I think you're on the record. We're documenting in our computer screen to make sure, in case you call up, we're going to have some theme music the next time to make sure that we
all I see down here is
yes.
a sweep of Philly this year. Was that you, Hugo?
Oh,
it was. So
Okay.
we'll get to that later.
Okay.
So yes,
Pearson keeps track of these predictions.
He does, man. He's an elephant. He doesn't forget.
I have the ice pack out.
Well, we could tell. Sure.
Anyhow, I wholeheartedly disagree with you. I think the most alarming thing on defense is the fact that offenses have been able to control the line of scrimmage and run the ball on the Giants despite a very significant focus on stopping the run and the resources that were allocated towards that in the offseason. And that has some feedback loop to the fact that, it prevents offenses from being consistently in high-pressure situations that then lead to sacks and turnovers. So I think it's a little bit of both things, right? But I think stopping the run is potentially one thing we can fix.
It'll be a tough one against Christian McCaffrey this week.
Yeah, well, James Conner had nearly 5 yards of carry. So, and Dallas, I pointed out, had a high volume of carries, but they only had 4 negative runs or no gains. So, the run defense needs to improve. But I think the really good teams, Hugo, they could stop the run en route to the quarterback.
And also
that's what separates the really good defenses.
And teams have been running on the Giants at a volume 51.3% of the time against the Giants. Only 3 teams have been run on more than the Giants have been. So teams are definitely exploiting that.
So I think our friend Len from Columbia, Maryland, was onto something. He says he wants, if you want to put speed on the field, he was essentially suggesting take out a linebacker, take out the second linebacker, and keep the big guys in the mix up front with a 5-man front to set a picket fence and protect those linebackers. So you take out a linebacker, you put a lighter guy in there, maybe your best guy who fills gaps. I don't know if that's Simmons or Pinnock or Belton or whoever, right? But I would go even further. I say put 1,300 pounds up there. I would move Leonard Williams to end, and then 3 big guys in the middle and Medow at the end of the line. And going forward, honestly, because Ojulari does not set a good edge, I would make him a situational pass rusher, and maybe that keeps his reps down and keeps him more healthy. But I think for this game, priority should be stop the run, put Purdy in passing situations, and then try to take your shots and blitz and do whatever you need to do. But priority should be stop the run.
Yeah, well, but once again, it goes beyond that to the standpoint of the tackling has to improve. And appreciate the phone call, Hugo, because if you go to the Arizona game, there were a lot of missed tackles. You know, James Conner would turn what could have been a 3-yard run into a 10-yard run. He was carrying guys with
tackles. 12 missed tackles.
That's too high of a volume. And San Francisco's great at forcing missed tackles because it's not just McCaffrey, it's Deebo Samuel. And a lot of their run plays are also by just pitching out into the flat. So, they don't just need to hand off. They'll toss it to Deebo Samuel, and then they'll allow him to have some yardage after the catch. So it's tackling. That's why I'm not as consumed with making sure the big boys are up front. And in fairness, they have taken Dexter Lawrence off the field, maybe more so than we've seen in the past. Now, you have to do that over the course of a season. You can't have one guy playing 95% of the snaps. And I think most people said to themselves, well, if you're bringing in Ashawn Robinson and Nacho, you have a reason to take Dexter Lawrence off the field because you're not worried. Last season, when they would take Dex off the field, teams would pinpoint who would come in and they would run the ball exactly at that guy. Right. I think with better depth, you figured, okay, that wouldn't happen. So they're still in the experimental phase from that standpoint. But it's not, to me, just having the big guys, because most defenses, you're going to have situations where the running back gets to the second level, and those linebackers have to bring those players down. That did not happen very often against Arizona. That has to change against San Francisco.
Especially against a San Francisco team that you, Lance, have called slippery. It is the perfect adjective for this group. And if they're a slippery team going against a team that's missing tackles against the Cardinals, you got to clean that up. You got to execute. I mean, so often you see players just kind of looking at this and thinking, oh, let me close it out and thinking about the next play. No, finish this one first. Finish this one. Get the guy to the ground. The Giants' official connected TV streaming app, Giants TV, brings original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV is free on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV, and on the Giants mobile app. 201-939-4513. Anthony in Phoenix is on the line. Anthony, you're on with Lance and Madelyn.
Good afternoon, guys. How are you doing?
We're doing all right.
Well. How are you?
Wonderful, especially after that. The way we played the second half, you gotta love it. It just shows us what we're capable of.
Absolutely, and I can imagine, especially for you out there surrounded by Cardinals fans in Phoenix.
Well, we got a band out here. Don't think that everybody came from out of town.
Oh, I've
been going to games out here for 24 years, and every time the Giants are here, we get good support here.
Love it.
Which is pretty good.
Love it.
Under the 49ers, I just want to throw a couple of things out, offense and defense. On offense, I'd like us to take the ball. If we get the flip and we have the option of taking or giving the ball, most teams are giving the ball away. I'd like to take the ball and let's go. Play fast and loose. Okay, let's just don't play tentative against this team. Come out and go after them. The other thing on defense, look, we just need to play better. We've got to put pressure on them. Williams has really got to show up. I mean, Dexter was double teamed most of the game. Williams has got to show up, and Robinson's got to show up. You know, where was Nachos? You know, these guys got to show up. What do we do? I've got a question for you. What do we do with McCaffrey? I'd like to put Pinnock on him. I don't know if that's possible because he's a safety, but you know what? We got to bring him up. I want him to shadow him. Wherever he goes, Pinnock goes with him. I think he is fast enough. He's big enough, and the way he's playing, it's just you gotta love it the way he played on Sunday.
Sure.
So I'll listen to what you guys got to say. We got to give kudos to Azudo. I love what the other guys mentioned earlier. Azudo played his heart out. And Pinnock did too. So did McKinney. I mean, he was all over the field. But you're right. We've got to tackle. We've got to wrap up. If we're not wrapping up, they're going to have a big field day with us. We've got two big problems there with Samuel and McCaffrey. But we really got to, we're not going to stop McCaffrey. But
no, but you can limit the big plays. I think that's what you're getting at, Anthony, and appreciate the phone call. You're never going to completely shut down a player, and I don't think any coaching staff goes in thinking that that's going to be accomplished. But you can limit McCaffrey to 3 or 4 yard runs as opposed to 7 or 8 yard runs.
Right.
And the reason why that adds up is it goes back to you want opportunities to get after the quarterback. You got to put the Niners in 3rd and longs.
Right.
3rd and 7s, 3rd and 8s. If you keep giving them 3rd and 3s and 3rd and 4s,
they're going to run the ball.
Yeah, and it also gives Brock Purdy that much more flexibility in what he can run. And Kyle Shanahan, I mean, they could still very well run the ball on a 3rd and 3. They could use Kyle Juszczyk, their fullback, to do something crafty. They get Deebo Samuel out in open space. Whereas now, if you're telling Brock Purdy it's a 3rd and 8, okay, he doesn't have the ability and the luxury to do that. So that's what, to me, is the biggest thing. It's the tackling. And that was my biggest takeaway from the Arizona game.
Yeah.
As much as we could focus on sacks and quarterback hits, if you miss the tackles and you allow James Conner to get rolling, then it's going to be a long day and a long afternoon. And that's exactly what transpired against the Cardinals. You want to hit Christian McCaffrey at the point of attack, and you want to bring him down.
Yeah.
Because he's a bouncy guy. You know, you hit him initially, and then all of a sudden he finds a crevice or a crack, and it becomes an explosive play. The Niners, they thrive on situations like that. Madelyn, they thrive on situations where it looks like they're going to get 2 yards, and in the blink of an eye, it turns into sometimes a 20-yard gain. We've seen that already against the Steelers, and we saw it against the Rams as well.
Well, and that's kind of bringing it back to the point that you made earlier, is that this week of walkthroughs leading up to this Thursday night game is really about getting back to the fundamentals, getting back to the basics of the game, getting back to executing and not trying to do anything fancy and not trying to get on a highlight reel, just executing your position, doing, to use the Belichick phrase, do your job and do it well. And that's what this team needs to really get down to. And that is how they will find their way into takeaways, into sacks in bunches, into execution. If they just execute and do their assignment against this team, not easy to do, but it's something that's the challenge at hand.
Well, and the other thing I think that you're looking at if you're the Giants is, and this goes back to the last caller's point, I don't know if it comes down to needing the football first, but you don't want to dig yourself in the last 2 holes.
Sure.
Right? I mean, they fell big down against the Cowboys, and then the same thing happened against Arizona. And while it was fun to watch that comeback for all Giants fans, right? You don't want to have to put yourself in that position all over again because, like I said, San Francisco is cut from a very different cloth than Arizona. It's one thing to do that against a Cardinals team that I think needed to rely on some of those explosive plays down the stretch and really didn't have anybody that they could turn to.
Sure.
The Niners, they can turn to a playmaker who can flip the script and flip the field position. So you can't go down 10, 15-0 like that. And it doesn't even have to come as a result of a turnover, Madelyn. I'm just talking about fundamentally you're not playing good defense.
Sure.
The Niners march up and down the field. They score a touchdown and a field goal, whatever it may be. And now you've got to all of a sudden try to climb out of that. You don't want to put yourself in that position against a team like San Francisco.
And you just don't want to put yourself in a position to have to climb out of a hole in back-to-back weeks, too, because that takes a lot. That takes a lot physically,
3 straight
mentally.
weeks,
Well, 3. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think it's 2. That first 3, they didn't do any climbing. Like, they were there.
Understandable.
But you know what? You don't want to be in that deficit in this point against a team like San Francisco. You want to be in the fight. Ideally, you want to be playing from ahead if you can get some offense or some productivity going early. But the more you can do early, the more you're in this fight.
And it will also be interesting to see whether or not they look to push the football down the field earlier in the game in this contest.
Right, yeah. Do they take that out of the toolbox earlier, or do they kind of wait until a necessity? Do they come out swinging?
Yeah, because...
If you're Brian Dable, if you're Mike Kafka, if you're this coaching staff, do you say, all right, first play of the game, 60-yard bomb to Jalen Hyatt?
It doesn't hurt to try to catch the Niners defense off guard or give them something to think about, especially since Saquon is not on the field. Because, once again... If you choose the methodical method, if you're not getting what you need on the ground and you're facing the 3rd and 8s and 3rd and 9s that I talked about, Madelyn, to me, you're playing right into the hands of the Niners.
And also just if Saquon is not on the field, because as Brian Dable said in his plot twist today, they're taking it all the way up to Thursday night. It's going to be a game time decision for Saquon Barkley, left tackle Andrew Thomas, and linebacker Azeez Ojulari also coming down to game time decisions Thursday against the Niners. Those hamstrings are tricky ones, but we'll see how it all goes down. Thursday night primetime, Thursday night football. A short week for the Giants. That's our show today. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live with Madelyn Burke and Lance Medow. Let us know what you thought. # Giants Chat at Madelyn Burke, at Lance Medow, MEDOW. Big Blue Kickoff Live, part of the Giants platform, podcast platforms everywhere, and giants.com/podcast. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll see you next time.